But for those of you who don't know me, what I currently work on is trusted wallet infrastructure at Turnkey. Had a long history of working at Open Zeppelin on smart contract audits, and then also did some policy work in various areas, but most notably with Coin Center on the Tornado Cash cases when that was sanctioned, and then later the developers themselves were prosecuted for money laundering and unlicensed money transmission. And that's the discussion that I'm going to have today, the implications of that, and what that means for a lot of people that are trying to develop safe and secure applications that use privacy, but are still compliant, trying to balance the idea of end user privacy with compliance with the law, or at the very least trying to interpret what might be very unclear guidance in the US. The main challenge there being that we have multiple jurisdictions, this was referenced earlier, where you might see one federal agency saying one thing, such as FinCEN, and then the Department of Justice saying another thing, and then trying to interpret and figure out exactly where you should fall in that so you don't run afoul of the law, or at least one of the regulators' interpretations of the law. I'm going to start with just what I'm currently focused on, or rather, what's the current regulatory landscape in the US? And that's decent, but not great in the sense of privacy. Last November, we did have a new administration elected, and that administration has been doing a lot of things that are overall very positive for the crypto industry. So we, as an industry, have seen the SEC become far more interested in having ongoing discussions. We've seen, the president himself is now engaging the industry in both good and bad ways, you might say. But there is one area where there really hasn't been improvement, unfortunately, and that is around the prosecution of cases against privacy-preserving applications, most notably Tornado Cash and Samurai Wallet. Now, these are prosecutions that started under the Biden administration, and they were primarily focusing on applications that were providing privacy technology, and then in some ways criminals use them. For example, North Korean hackers were using Tornado Cash to launder stolen funds. Perfect, there we are. So the battle for on-chain privacy. So we're at a point where these prosecutions are continuing, unfortunately, and that's put us in a situation where, even though the DOJ has come out and issued guidance saying, hey, we're not going to do this kind of regulation by prosecution any longer, they have continued the existing prosecutions the Biden administration started. And the primary issue here is the fact that there's no law that these protocols have broken around privacy. There's nothing that says you can't build a privacy-preserving protocol, but what they are doing, and specifically what the DOJ is doing in order to prosecute these cases, is saying, hey, we consider you to be a money transmitter, which means that you should have registered and complied with certain rules that all money transmitters must follow, and we're going to prosecute you under that and a lot of the implications of that. But unfortunately, at the same time, the actual regulator for money transmission, which is FinCEN, has come out and saying, if you don't have control of funds or fund transmission, you are not a money transmitter. So we have very contradictory advice from two federal agencies, and this has put us in a place where even under the current administration saying we're not going to do this anymore, we have to still worry about the future. Even if we believe this administration for the next 4 years will not prosecute any developer for building privacy-preserving technology, assuming that someone bad uses it and then suddenly they change their tune on that, the administration after could still come after you for things that happen today. So that is why we're currently hoping to get better statutory protections for developers in the industry. And that's ultimately what my lawsuit right now is about. So what I'm currently doing now is in January, I filed a lawsuit against the Biden administration at the time to basically say, hey, I am a developer. I want to build a privacy-preserving protocol around crowdfunding, and I would like to build it without the threat of prosecution coming down on my head in the future. It's going to be built in such a way that I should, it follows FinCEN guidance. I shouldn't be a money transmitter. The privacy I will build in should be for the end user's protection. There are still ways that could be compliant if there are certain regulatory requirements that do come up. But I currently would live in fear if I built this protocol and deployed it today. And I would like the court to grant me relief to basically say, hey, the DOJ cannot come and prosecute you later after the fact for something that you've built following the guidance that FinCEN has laid out. So that is currently going through the works, and the idea there is hopefully that if there is relief granted by the court, that would be a precedent for other developers. The other path to getting the protections that we want in the United States would be to pass the Clarity Act, which is currently, or the Market Certainty Act, which is currently still going through the process. It's still working on being passed in the Senate, and then a new version would then be passed in the House, which passed a previous version a few months ago. So there is hope for that, but with Congress, you can never be too certain. So we have two paths to resolving this issue: Congress or my lawsuit or another, court-granted relief. But this is not just a problem in the U.S. because we had some prior talks talking about the travel rule and the implications for how that works. So, one, the U.S. obviously sets a lot of legal trends, being the center of capital for the international financial system. And then you're also seeing EU exploring more regulatory requirements. They put out things with MiCA on how certain providers of digital asset services should be compliant, what they should be reporting. This doesn't directly apply to wallet-to-wallet transfers or self-custodial transfers, but that could change. There have been now more. There's been more movement on going after encrypted communications across the board and with chat control. So that could also eventually start to apply to financial transactions as well, given that there's a lot of overlap in the way that cryptographically work. So there are still concerns there. And the idea that is like, okay, well, how can we set up the system so that we're able to show regulators that there isn't a path where you have to regulate from the top down and force that essentially data is collected for all users in order to go after money laundering or go after bad actors, even if that current system is not very effective, as we saw earlier with a previous talk from Eric. So what is the path forward? We've talked a lot about this already. We've seen several people present their solutions today. Railgun obviously is a sponsor of today, but one I'll focus on is privacy pools, specifically from Oxbow, because it really is taking the Tornado Cash design, which was kind of the hallmark of something the government did not like and went after directly, both the developers and through sanctions, and able to basically apply compliance protections that are going to not require end users to reveal any data about themselves or collect personal information, but could stop them from making use of privacy-preserving technology that might be used to aid and abet criminal money laundering or something like it. I won't go into detail about it today, but basically there are ways to essentially, be able to exclude bad actors if we're able to identify where those funds came from, to not let them go through the pool and essentially mix that money with what otherwise be good actors that just want to have normal privacy when they're operating on chain. Now, there's a lot further that we would want to go from this, but the hope is that by mixing using Z technology not just for privacy preservation, but also for proving innocence or for proving that there has not been a source of criminal funds, that we can build systems where we can point them to regulators and say, hey, this is not only going to be better for privacy preservation of users, which has frankly national security implications as well as just good consumer protections, but it's also going to be able to actually stop criminals from making use of these technologies at the same time and provide better compliance measures that is not going to require collecting a lot of personal identifiable information. And there's been a great paper that was put out by Coin Center, who continues to be a leader on this issue in the US policy world, saying tear down this walled garden, let's reconsider AML and KYC protections in the modern age, now that the US Treasury and others are starting to explore that and figure out, okay, how should we essentially re-engineer or really apply our current regulatory regime to crypto. And it's well, we should rethink the regulatory regime, not just in crypto, but across the board with the way that traditional finance has been done, because there are a lot of holes. There's a lot of ways that money is still continuing to be laundered with a 99% failure rate of being able to detect and seize these funds. Whereas in crypto, we actually have a lot more tools available and can still preserve privacy at the same time. So my case today is just to say that, one, we should be absolutely protecting the ability for people to build protocols that are non-custodial. That needs to be the bedrock of this foundation. And then for additional protocols that you're building on top of that, to have the ability to essentially say, okay, privacy is not a crime, and we can provide better compliance through cryptography. So we can comply with the law. It's entirely possible to do so, but we also need regulators to give us that clear guidance that will allow us to know what bucket we go into, what's appropriate, and we want to make sure that the lines that are drawn are appropriate. So that's just being part of an active conversation. If you're in a regulatory environment that's either the US or a different one, then being part of that conversation makes a big difference, even if it's a small regulatory regime. So I would say be aware, be engaged. If you're not already talking to policymakers as a protocol developer, I think it would actually behoove you to do so or to join organizations that are doing so. I'm I'm a big fan of Coin Center, but there's also more member organizations that are engaging in these conversations as well. And if you're interested in what Coin Center has proposed as talking points with regulators, the report that they put out is a really good one, talking about how we use, ZK technology and other technologies to preserve privacy and provide compliance at the same time. So from here, we're going to actually have a panel with some folks that are going to discuss and talk about what they are building that can fall within these categories of privacy and compliance. So stick around for that.